Welcome back to Passionate About Music Education, a channel dedicated to you, the music educator. My name is Rachel Hardman, and today I'm going to talk about how you can help your students play more musically. A couple of months ago, I was asked to be an adjudicator for some scholarship bursaries. I was asked to listen to a whole host of wonderful recordings by young people playing a variety of instruments and give my feedback on how I thought they were playing and whether they were deserving of the bursary based on the criteria. And one of the biggest observations I noticed was the fact that these students could play brilliantly. They were playing technically difficult pieces, but sometimes they were missing that musicality, that musical phrasing, that sort of wow factor, that magical, goosebump moment of playing. Not because they weren't capable, but because they weren't really thinking about that, because sometimes the pieces were maybe a little too challenging. And I kind of revisited this conversation a week ago when I was coaching a very talented clarinetist. She plays a clarinet in the school band, but had recently done a solo competition. She had played this very difficult piece, but the judges had come back to her with, you need to work on phrasing and musicality. So we were having a chat about this, and I said, do you understand what they mean? And she went, well, truthfully, no, I don't. I don't know how to do that. And although that sounds really strange, how can a student be playing, an advanced level solo on a clarinet and not know how to play it musically? She plays in a school band, they talk about dynamics and phrasing, but that experience of playing in an ensemble, playing with 5 other clarinetists on part 1 or part 2, blending your part, blending it with the band sound, it's quite a different experience to playing solo, to being totally in control of the dynamic shaping and the phrasing. So although she was an advanced student for her age, in that area of solo performing, although she could play it technically brilliantly, she needed some coaching on it. Hopefully this video will give you some ideas on how you can help your students really focus on bringing out the musicality of a piece, regardless of whether it's a beginner piece, intermediate or advanced. Our students need our help, particularly those going on to do, exams, auditions, get bursaries, take those GCSE, IB level performance exams, take the ABRSM graded exams. Because it's not enough just to play the correct rhythm and pitch. You know that. You know that when you listen to that spine-tingling piece of music that's your favourite, there's something magical about it. That musician or group of musicians have really brought out that musicality of it. And we need to help our students understand how to do that, because it's quite a difficult skill. So the first thing I talked about with this student was the difference between playing in band and playing solo. The fact that what they're actually asking her is to be in control of the musical expression. And it was something that she hadn't really thought about, because often she's blending with 5 other people. So if your students are coming through the band program and going on to solos, again, this is something that you can help guide your student, because they've already got that, they're already on their journey, their musical journey of brilliance. You've already coached them how to play. So it's like, well, how do I adapt from an ensemble player to a solo player? Or vice versa, if you're coming from a studio where you do lots of one-to-one teaching, how do you encourage your students to go from playing in a one-to-one solo setting to being somebody who can blend in an ensemble? They're very different skills, which is why in the GCSE music course, they ask students to play a solo and an ensemble piece. And generally, most of the students do the solo part really well, but they struggle with the ensemble because it's a very different skill. But if you're coming from a band program, you're a band program teacher, then your students will have the opposite. They'll probably be great at blending, playing with an ensemble, but then having to switch to being a solo performer is a different skill. We know they're different skills. You know that because you're a fabulous musician. The second exercise you could try is to get your student to exaggerate the dynamics, as a technical activity, as a warm-up, because again, when they're playing in a band, they're playing the dynamics to match. So although the music might say forte, if you've got 30 clarinets on part 1, you might go, well, it does say forte, but I don't need you to all blast, or I'm only going to have 5 of you playing. I've played in a concert band, a professional one, and it asked us all to play a piano, and they actually took people off the parts. They went, oh, we want one to part. Well, how do you learn to control that dynamic and exaggerate that dynamic if you suddenly drop people out? And, you know, I know exactly why the conductor did it, and it wasn't a judgment, but if I'm then going to go and practice solo performing, I'm not really learning how to play that pianissimo or piano sound, and because I've not had that experience. So one of the activities we did to talk about musicality and phrasing was to really exaggerate the dynamics, but for fun, so that she understood how it felt, how far she could push that forte, how far she could push the pianissimo, how much control it did. And of course, because she hadn't really practiced that within that sort of musicality, she focused really on the pitch and the rhythm. Of course, it changed how that musical phrase, that couple of bars felt to play. There's a difference between playing a technically difficult part quietly to playing it loudly. And then we talked about the musical phrase, the 4-bar, the 8-bar, the 16-bar phrase that the composer created. We talked about the overall shape of the piece. What is the story of the music? Because often our students aren't thinking at advanced level. They're not really thinking about the story of the composition. What is it the composer tried to create? What kind of mood, expression, feeling, and how we as performers can express that? How can we take it to a new level? And our students need us to help explain that. Sometimes you'll just have to, at the beginning stages, maybe tell them, but the more they think about it for themselves and you ask them questions, those lovely open-ended questions, like, where do you think the loudest part of the music is? Where do you think the composer really wants to bring out, you know, the melodic line? Where's the pinnacle of it? Where's the quietest part? Once the students start looking for that themselves, they'll be able to then start applying this to their own practice when they're not in the room with you. Because this is really, you as musicians, you know this, musicality is not just playing the right pitch and rhythm, it's also bringing out the, you know, the melodic line, the articulation, the expression. Those are what gets our students the highest marks in formal exams. So we want our students to really think for themselves. She was a bright girl, she could do this, but she hadn't really thought about it because she wasn't having that one-to-one coaching. Another little strategy that I like to use with my music students is to help them to look at the shape of the melodic line, perhaps where it's starting to change key, where those accidentals start appearing in the musical line, and ask them to lean into them, perhaps put a little bit of a push on those notes, just to bring out the colour, because often we have these either key changes or accidentals to bring in some either dissonance or colour to the shape of the melodic line. So again, this is a beautiful way to start helping students go, that will help with the musical line and the shape. Strategy number 4. In this particular piece the young lady was playing, there was what I like to call long notes followed by complicated twiddles. And if you're a clarinet player, you kind of know what that is. It's something a beautiful long note and then something really technically difficult twiddles. And of course, as a clarinetist or any musician, you really want to get those twiddles right. You spend a lot of time, you know, particularly if they're not just straight up scales and there's some, you know, accidentals and jumps. You spend a lot of time working on that because you want to get the technical part right. You want to get the notes right. You want to get the rhythm of it right. So of course, when she came to this phrase, actually the long notes were the melodic line, the phrase. And the twiddles were just twiddles. They were just decoration. But she was concentrating on the twiddles because she wanted to get them right. And I was, you know, super impressed that she was getting them right because they weren't easy at all. But when we switched it around, and we talked about, okay, you got this long note, what shape are you going to start it quiet? Are you going to keep it at the same volume? Are you going to bring it up and down? Are you going to start loud and then go quiet? Which way are you going to, you know, there's a kind of idea of musical shapes being like little mountains, waves. I said, focus on those. Focus on the long note. Play the twiddles, but don't focus on them. Focus on the melodic shape, the long notes. Completely changed how she played it because she had so much more control. The actual technical challenging part, she played with more accuracy, more rhythmic accuracy, because she wasn't panicking about it. She didn't have that fear factor going in, oh my gosh, oh that's the really hard bit, oh I've got to get this right, which we all have done. You know, we've all done that. We've all got those really hard parts and we've sped up and we've panicked about them because they're hard. But when she was just focusing on the long note, the musical phrase, the musical part of the phrase, changed the way she performed it. And again, it was just a tiny little change, but it made such a difference for her in how she thought about playing it. My final strategy, often with these harder pieces, the rhythm gets more complicated, or the time signature becomes more complicated than perhaps what they're playing in band. So this piece was in 3/8, and it had all these sort of triplet sections that were quite tricky because there were some ties over the bar line. So, rhythmically it wasn't easy to feel the pulse, but you need to keep feeling the pulse within it to keep that phrasing so that it doesn't speed up and doesn't slow down and doesn't lose that musical shape. So again, try to help your students work on which notes are really important. Like if you're playing in a waltz, that beat 1 is really important to give that 1 feel. Again in 6/8, that lovely sort of lilting dance feel of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of this. It's what makes that piece sound like it should do. Why did the composer even bother picking 6/8 bone? If we're not playing with that feel in 6/8, then it's not, it's not an effective piece. So help them to understand which note of the rhythm they should be focusing on moving towards. In the same way with the melodic line, what note they're aiming for as the pinnacle of that musical phrase, because it will help take out the fear again of trying to play it rhythmically accurately but forgetting to play it with musicality. Strategy number 6, always keep coming back to this. Praise your student when they've been brave enough to try something you've asked them to, brave enough to try something and made a mistake and actually fixed it. Because stepping into some of this technically difficult musical phrasing is quite terrifying. But when they've, particularly if they're a student who doesn't even know you, or they've come for an audition, or they've come, she'd come into a solo audition and she'd got feedback. She went, I don't really know how to apply that. Let's help our students really understand how to apply that, how to take that knowledge, how to take their musical skills on to the next step, but in a supportive way, because we want people to love music. We don't want anybody to have fear of playing a musical instrument. We want them to love playing music, this opportunity to express yourself in a creative way. And that's what you and I can do for our students. Give them lots of praise. Give them lots of support for when they've tried something you've asked them to do, because they won't be afraid to try it again and again and again and again. This is how they grow. And I always encourage my students to go and listen to the piece they're playing if they can find it. When I was learning clarinet back in the day, if you always listen to a classical piece that you were playing out, the grade 6, 7, 8 repertoire, you either had to buy the CD and hope you could find it in HMV, or you had to go to the local library and go through all their sort of cassettes and hope they had it. Nowadays, we don't have that. This piece of music the girl played, she'd never even listened to it. There was a beautiful recording by a clarinetist. There's an incredible performance of it on YouTube by a flautist. There was somebody had played it on the saxophone, and it was like, go listen to this, encourage your students to listen. Again, that sort of, what did you like about the piece? What was musical? What could you bring out yourself? What did you like? How did they do it? And then, what didn't you like? What don't you think worked? And why didn't you think worked? You can either bring that into your classroom and do that, which is not a bad thing to do, because often our students don't go away and listen, even however much you encourage them to do it, because they get busy. But if we can encourage our students to go and listen, they learn much quicker because they've already heard the piece, they have a sense of shape. Also, if they're playing solo pieces like like clarinet, there's generally an accompaniment. So either piano or it'll be an orchestra. But a lot of the time when you're practicing on your own, you haven't got the accompanist playing for you. So therefore you don't really hear the whole piece. You're only hearing the melodic line that you're playing. You don't hear how that fits with the harmony of the piano part. And it was one of the biggest challenges I had myself as a student. It's like, you go and learn Mozart clarinet concerto, it's the standard. You're playing it at home, you're just playing your part, you have no idea what the rest of it sounds like until somebody suddenly turns up 2 days before you do your exam and you go, oh my gosh, it sounds so different. And it can really throw you off. But had I had the opportunity to be able to listen to it in the same way our children can now, our students can, then I'd have got the piece more accurate. much, much quicker. So encourage your students to really listen to music, listen to the pieces that they're playing, and not to be afraid to listen to the piece being played on a variety of instruments. So I'd love to know what your top tip is in helping your students play musically with that musical expression. How do they go from just playing a piece with rhythmic and melodic accuracy to that next level, that sort of magical goosebump moment of performance? If you could drop that in the comments, that would be great. Share with our community of passionate music educators. And if you like this video, like this topic, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, share it with colleagues, leave a comment on any topics you want me to go into in more detail, and I look forward to seeing you here again very soon on Passionate About Music Education.